Burial Rites is the hauntingly original debut novel of Adelaide writer Hannah Kent. It's based on the true story of a young woman accused of murder in 19th century Iceland. I talked to Hannah about where she got the idea for this very dark, gothic novel, but we were talking on Skype, and unfortunately the quality of the vision is not great, so apologies in advance. Hannah Kent, welcome to Booktopia via the miracle that is, or maybe isn't, Skype.
Thank you very much for having me.
What took you to Iceland in the first place?
Basically, I always knew I wanted to be a writer. Always knew that ever since I was very, very young. And my parents, as wonderfully as supportive of that as a life goal as they had been, had nevertheless always told me that you probably need another career to, live and be independent, financially independent. So by the time I was completing high school, I was thinking, what do I do? Do I go to university and study writing? Or maybe I should just keep on doing that on the side and then maybe go become a teacher or a doctor. And so the decision I came to was to basically defer that whole decision and go overseas for a year. And around that time, I found out that Rotary were offering exchange programs. And so I decided to go along to the information session and decided, yes, this is what I would do. And the Rotary Club, rather than you just saying, I would like to go to France and off they send you, you actually have to apply and be selected, and then you don't even get to really say where it is that you'll be going. What they let you do is put down preferences. So you get about 3 countries that you would like to be sent to. And so I put down, I think, Iceland, Sweden and Norway. And my reasoning for that was simply because I'd never seen snow before. And then, so, really thought very deeply about it. I just really wanted to see snow. And then I went through to the application process and went to panel interviews and things like that. And I remember I was sitting on one particular panel and there were 3 Rotarians in front of me and they were asking me all the hard questions. And then they said, look, Hannah, how would you cope? How would you respond if you were sent to a place where it was dark 20 hours a day? And I said, I think that would be fascinating. I'd love to see what that would be like. And you can sort of see them all sort of stare shiftily at one another and make a mark next to my name. And sure enough, that's where they sent me. So I'm pretty sure, I think it's pretty much because I seem to be the only person who responded enthusiastically to the prospect of living in a very dark country. So that's how I went. So I went and lived in Iceland for 12 months.
So do you think that, in fact, this has turned out to be slightly a case of be careful what you wish for, because you got to Iceland, it was dark, you saw more snow than you could possibly bargain for, and I gather that the origins of this remarkable novel really, it's the loneliness that you endured when you found yourself in Iceland in the dark and in the snow.
I was sent to a very small town and everyone knew who I was, so I felt very conspicuous. I'd be walking to school. I have this memory of walking to school through the snow and this car pulling up beside me and then slowing down to the same pace that I was walking at, and everyone coming to the windows and staring at the exchange student, but no one said anything. And of course, coming from Adelaide, if a car pulls up next to you and then slows down, you walk a lot faster, you don't slow down and look back at them. So it was very weird. Everyone knew who I was, so I felt very conspicuous, but at the same time, no one was really talking to me, so I felt very alienated at the same time. So, and of course, all these feelings of, being conspicuous and being looked at and being strange and foreign, and at the same time being in this very alien environment, and then also being homesick, kind of all compounded everything until I was just basically miserable for the first couple of months. And also I didn't learn the language, so that's another way that you can be completely alienated, I suppose, as a person. And it was during those first few months that I first heard the story of Agnes Magnusdottir. And I think, looking back now, I didn't think of it at the time, but looking back now, hearing about this woman who had been ostracized and more or less completely condemned by this small community that she had grown up in, something about that must have resonated with my own experiences. Not to say that they're comparable, because I really don't think you can compare an exchange student who's a bit homesick to a woman who, is condemned to death.
What kind of research did you do, and how much is the story based on truth?
Agnes Magnusdottir was basically condemned to death for her role in basically aiding and abetting the murder of two men called Nathan Ketilsson and Peter Jonsson. And these men are sort of characters unto themselves. But Agnes, when I first heard about her, I only really first heard a few sketchy details. You know, I knew her name. When I first heard that, I drove through the area basically where she'd lived and was told, you know, that she was a servant woman and that she had been convicted of this crime, and that there was a man involved and she was, you know, maybe in her 30s, and that was about all I really knew. So it wasn't until, as you say, I started researching the crime that I started to get a broader understanding of her life. But that took a long time. I started writing the novel quite seriously when I decided it would be my PhD project at Flinders University. I was researching the way in which we represent historical murdering women in fiction, and so this was going to be my creative product. So I started researching Iceland at that time because I thought to write a book set there and, you know, to get away with it, basically, I really needed to know my stuff. So I started by researching, I looked at everything, diaries written by English scientists who visited Iceland to look at the geysers, but also made notes about the people and their customs. I looked at song lyrics, poetry, Icelandic poetry, family memoirs and family trees. I looked at really dry, quite entertaining in retrospect, not at the time, academic articles on everything from sheep grazing to epidemics of smallpox to how you boil angelica into moss. It was so much fun, actually. I just read everything I could get my hands on. So basically what happened after I'd spent more or less 1.5 to 2 years researching Iceland quite generally, the social and cultural, political milieu, that sort of thing, I received funding to go to Iceland and finally be able to research, I guess, much more specifically Agnes's life and her role again in the murders. So I spent about 6 weeks very intensively researching her, and I managed to go to the National Archives where I found her in censuses, I found her in ministerial records and parish archives. Icelanders have this wonderful thing called, the literal translation would be the soul register, where the priest would go around to farmers every winter and write down the names of everyone who was present in the farm, early census basically, but also what their behaviour was like and how well they could read and all this other sort of interesting information. So by that stage, I knew so much about Iceland that when I found a small fact about Agnes, for instance, I discovered her birth record and it listed her illegitimacy, I could then contextualise that with everything I knew about, I guess, the implications of being born a bastard in 19th century Iceland. So it was not just then data collection. Her life particularly became very vivid for me. And then I basically managed to find a lot of information about where she lived and worked. I was then able to go and actually see these places, most of which are still working farms to this day. And then from that point on, I basically came back and sat with all this new information I had. And then the following year, this was around September, October, and then the following year I sat down at my desk in January and wrote the novel. I wrote about 1,000 words a day and then finished the first draft in May.
Hannah, one of my favourite things about the book is the incredible atmospherics that you create. So I feel that I know what the inside of the house that belongs to the family that Agnes lives with prior to her execution smells like. You're extremely good on the sort of fetid, pungent, stinky elements, and there's a fantastic scene where the family are making sausages and they're sort of wrist deep in blood and viscera.
The particular scene that you're referring to on the slaughter day, actually I decided to include it for a few reasons. One was the fact that it's, as much as the landscape is incredibly bleak and hostile, and as much as their existence is very, very hard and, you know, survival is the thing, to them it's also ordinary. And I think for me I really wanted to capture the idea that these people live in incredibly difficult circumstances, but at the same time that's normal for them. and they get on with things. And that's something that I really admire about a lot of Icelanders I know today, their stoicism, and something that I thought to make a really real Icelandic setting I needed to include and sort of pay tribute to in a way. That particular scene, though, I also really wanted to include because that slaughter scene, not only for the fact that it would demonstrate the way these people survived, but also because when I was an exchange student in Iceland, I was with a different host family by this stage, and it was probably autumn. It would have been around slaughter time. And I came in from school and went into the kitchen, and my host mother had her elbows covered in blood, like all her forearms covered in blood, and I was sort of horrified. And she was straining blood through linen, basically, to make blood sausage. She was a caterer, and she sometimes made these traditional foods as well. So I had the fantastic opportunity of watching her make that. And it was a really vivid image, a woman who's very neat and tidy and looks after herself, with blood all over her. That to her was completely normal as well. So I wanted to include that because it was such a vivid image for me, and I haven't forgotten it.